There's aspects of fear that will cripple you. There are aspects of fear that will empower you.
Climate change doesn't give a damn whether your oil is ethical or not.
What would a life look like where you didn't trust anybody? It'd be a really empty life.
So welcome everyone to Leaders Lounge tonight. We have Shannon Moroney with us, and my name's Julia Sheldon. So just to fill you in, we're going to be doing about a 45-minute Q&A between Shannon and myself, and then we'll open it up to questions from you guys. If you happen to have questions that stem from the questions that I'm asking, just kind of give me a little sign, something that you want to ask a question, and you can feel free to jump in. It's not just between Shannon and I. And if anyone has Twitter and a smartphone, feel free to tweet about what's going on. The hashtag is Leaders Lounge, or Facebook status updates, whatever. If you pull out your phone, I'm assuming that you're tweeting about how awesome this is.
Hopefully nobody is going through a breakup at the moment and you're updating your status or something. Don't do that. Turn it off if that is happening.
That would be awful. Oh dear. Yeah, just turn it off. Just throw it away. Goodness.
I'm not on Facebook, so I don't know anything about that.
Well, you knew enough about relationship statuses on Facebook. Fantastic. Okay, so we'll just kick things off then. So, Shannon, I would just like to start off by thanking you for coming and welcoming you, and maybe let's just give a brief synopsis of where your story starts.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I'd just love to know if are there people in the audience that have already read the book Through the Glass? Okay, my friend Alana. Awesome. So just to give you a little bit of a background to it, 6 years ago, right around this time, I was just getting married. I turned 30 in September. I was married on Thanksgiving weekend to my soulmate, Jason. We had a wonderful, happy relationship. The only time we ever really argued was if I didn't eat lunch, and then we had to make a decision about tile at the Home Depot or something, and I'm not that nice when I haven't eaten lunch. So we had a very harmonious relationship, Jason and I. Jason had come, though, from a difficult past, for sure. We met in 2003, so about 9 years ago now. I was a high school guidance counselor, and I took some of my students to volunteer at a local, not really a soup kitchen, we called it a restaurant for low-income patrons. So people who came to that place could receive a really nutritious meal for just $1, but be treated as though they'd spent $100 on it. And Jason was the coordinator of that restaurant in Kingston, Ontario. And I got to know him. I mean, actually, at that restaurant. When I first met him, I was really just sort of struck by his ability to manage a really large group of volunteers, over usually 40 people, doing all kinds of things like plucking the skin off of donated Kentucky Fried Chicken, and then he'd make it into chicken a la king or something. And then there were usually about over 200 clients, very needy clients, some very high-risk clients coming through the doors, and he seemed to be able to manage it all very beautifully. He's a very big person physically, but very gentle and soft in his manner, and he was a beloved person. He'd worked at this community food program for about 5 years, and it was just clear that everyone loved him, and my first impression was fantastic. So I was really happy. Went out over a few weeks of volunteering. He asked me out on a date, and had that wonderful sort of crush feeling, like, great, we're going to meet for tea at a downtown cafe. And then that lovely, light-hearted feeling went away right away. In the first 5 minutes of our date, Jason said that there was something he had to tell me right away that I needed to know, and that was that he was on parole. He'd spent 10 years in prison, and he was on parole with a life sentence. And I heard the words life sentence, and you know what that means. That means you've taken a life. And I just was in total shock. I couldn't believe it. I looked at this kind, still young man. My mind was trying to figure out, how old is he now, and how old is when this happened, and what happened, and a lot of questions. Sometimes people say to me, why didn't you just get up from the table and walk away, when the man across from you said that he was a murderer? And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I mean, one is I already knew him a little bit, and you know, I could respect that he was being honest with me. I would have no way of knowing that there was anything like that about him. He didn't look like a killer that we would see on CSI or something like that on TV or in the movies. And also because I'm a high school guidance counselor, I'm used to sitting across the table from people that tell me very painful things about themselves. So I sat and I listened to him. He filled me in on some of the details of that, what had happened 15 years prior in 1988. Jason was just past his 18th birthday, and he killed his 38-year-old female roommate after an argument that got very out of control very, very quickly. And I won't go into any more detail. That's sort of covered in the book. And as he told me this, I was shocked. I was just shocked. I felt incredibly sad, thinking of course about the victim, thinking about this young man and how had that taken place. Jason kind of explained that he had no prior history of violence of any kind. He pled guilty to the charges, was sentenced to life 10. The judge saw him as a very young man. Nobody understood what had happened. He went into a psychiatric assessment, and they weren't really able to find anything other than to say it was this isolated incident of adolescent rage. So he served his entire sentence and was released, and had been a model inmate as well as a model return to society. But I was still just horrified, really, and I didn't know, even were I to become friends with Jason, I needed to know probably, more about him. He invited me to meet with his psychologist and parole officer, and the word from them was, Jason is our best guy. He's never going to reoffend. He's not at risk to reoffend. He's made this fantastic start. He's a talented, beautiful artist, doing really well, and we fully support this relationship growing. But I was really reluctant. I thought he was fantastic. We spent more time together. I felt that wonderful feeling, when you can be absolutely yourself with someone. But I didn't want the life sentence, a life on parole, and I didn't even really know what that all meant. So at one point, after a few months, I stopped spending time with Jason. I went out with somebody else, and I really just thought, great, maybe this person will be as wonderful and special as Jason is, but without that really hard past. And very quickly I realized that that Jason was the person for me. I remembered a quote about forgiveness I'd heard a long time ago that says, forgiveness means letting go of all hope for a better past. And I sat with that for a while, and I thought, okay, to really fully have Jason in my life, I'm going to have to forgive that past. It's not going to change. And once I was able to do that, then Jason and I entered into what was a fantastic relationship, as I said, just filled with joy, with promise for the future. We told my family right away. That's not something that I was going to keep hidden from them. Wanted my parents to have a chance to decide for themselves how they felt about Jason becoming part of our family. My brother and sister, close friends, and Jason was very lucky. Everyone was unanimous in our sadness over what had happened, but also in our hope that Jason would live up to his promise of a life of contributing to society, and every evidence in his life said that that's what was happening. So for 3 years we lived together. We moved to Peterborough eventually, where I'd gone to Trent University, and Jason returned to school. He went to the Halliburton School of the Arts, where he got straight A's and loved his work and planned to become a children's book illustrator. And we had a normal life, and the only thing that was different about our life is that once a month a parole officer would come over for a cup of coffee and check in with him, and that was it. So everything was moving forward for the future. We took the next step. We bought a house. We really wanted to start a family, so we planned to get married and have this beautiful wedding on Thanksgiving weekend in 2005. And then exactly 1 month later, on our 1 month wedding anniversary, I was here in Toronto at a guidance counselors conference at the airport, and a police officer came to the door of my hotel room to say that my husband had been arrested and charged with 17 very serious counts, including sexual assault and kidnapping of 2 women in our community, 2 strangers to him, and that he was now in custody. He'd actually called 911 himself after assaulting these women at his workplace. He worked part-time in a health food store, and then bringing them to our home. And so that is the moment that my book begins and that my story begins, this horrific moment. On the front cover of the book you'll see this, well, our wedding picture there, and then this shattering glass. And that's what I remember feeling the moment that I heard those words, "Your husband has been arrested." And since I knew that Jason had turned himself over to police and given a full confession, he told the police, "Just put me away." I knew that the life that I had had was over, and I began what was a very long and difficult journey to understand what had happened, who he was, and how I was going to ever piece my life back and be the person how was I ever going to find joy again after this, after what had happened. And that also led me on a journey through the criminal justice system, the correctional system, and my eyes were open to a lot of how our systems work.
Okay.
So that was the short version.
Yeah, really.
That was just getting to where the book starts.
Wow, okay. So then, at one point in your book, you said that I never wanted to protect Jason, but you were unwilling to walk away from him. And I guess, well, what's the difference between protecting him and staying with him?
Well, one of the things I had to do right away was I had to go to the jail and talk to Jason myself. I mean, he was locked away in solitary confinement. I really didn't even know if the person that I had married and loved still existed. I didn't know who this person was who'd committed these horrible crimes. And so after a few days of extreme trauma, finding this out, going back to Peterborough, not being able to return to my house, seeing my house covered with crime scene tape on the front page of the paper, what I really kept thinking was, I just kept thinking, what happened? What happened to you, Jason? My mom, the first reaction my mom had was, she said, "Didn't Jason know how much we loved him?" Because we just thought, how could someone who was so loved ever do this? And all of our minds were just filled with confusion, and I knew the person who had the answers was Jason. And so I went to the jail to try to have a conversation. That's the book is called Through the Glass. That was partly in reference to the broken glass, but partly in reference to these conversations that then took place through prison glass. And but to answer your question, I didn't want to protect Jason from what was happening on the outside, but what I realized is that's actually what jails do. Is yes, they protect us from people who are dangerous, who could commit crimes, but they also protect those same people from facing up to the consequences of their action. And they leave in the aftermath, they leave their families behind. And I was starting to find out what it meant to be guilty by association. By the end of a month, I lost my position at school. I eventually had to leave my community. I'd lost friends, all kinds of things, as people lined up to judge not Jason, but me, because he was removed from society. So partly when I visited him, it was to tell him what was going on in the community, to make him live up to it. I didn't want to protect him from that. And the other part was to support him, the support part. I didn't just turn away from him. I loved Jason. I hated what he did, but I loved the person. And it was a horrible, something to be caught in, trying to figure that out. But I wanted to hold him accountable. So part of supporting him was supporting him to plead guilty, supporting him to uncover in himself what had caused these crimes, because nobody else was doing that work. There were no psychologists, no lawyers going. There was nobody but me. So that was part of my decision. Was lots of people misread it. Lots of people think, oh, she must be going to the jail. She must be delusional. What's the matter with her? How could she go and see this guy? But they didn't know what was really happening in those visits, and that's why I wanted to write about it too.
You said that you hated what he did, but you still loved him. So I guess in saying that, then you forgave the person. And your friend Rachel said that too. She said, I don't forgive his actions, but I forgive him. And I guess then, what does that forgiveness, that was for your benefit, or was it for his?
Yeah, forgiveness is one of the themes that runs through the book, in this question of what does forgiveness mean. I think, lots of people think forgiveness is weak, it's letting somebody off the hook. But my eventual choice to forgive Jason was never to forgive what he'd done. I would never forgive his crimes, but to commit to seeing that there was a human being behind those horrible acts. And moreover, it was a commitment to myself to not become someone filled with rage, revenge thoughts, anger, all the things that could have the potential to make my life miserable. Really, Jason took so much from me. I didn't have a choice about that. That's something I learned about what it means to be victimized, is to have your choices taken away. And Jason had also committed crimes against me, crimes of voyeurism. He'd been filming me in the bathroom of our home over several occasions, so I became an official victim in the legal process, but also fell victim to the aftermath of his crimes, as I mentioned before. So I had to really make some really hard choices for myself. Think, who do I want to be when I one day emerge from this nightmare? And I received a letter, one of some awful letters I received from people in my life, and this one friend wrote me to say, don't you understand that these women, these victims, will never recover? And I was just absolutely incensed, because I thought that's just condemning them, ruined for life. I don't want to live in a society where that's the expectation of a victim, or the expectation of the family member of an offender is that you're either part of it, or you're on the offender side, or that's it, now you're going to be stuck with a life sentence of your own. And I didn't want that. As I said, I was 30 years old. I deserved a better life, and I had to make some choices about how I was going to recover in a healthy way. Certainly there could have been options to turn to drugs or alcohol, or any kind of negative coping mechanism, and I just knew I didn't want that for myself. And so part of that meant choosing a path of forgiveness, which ended up letting me off the hook. It really did. It let me, choosing to feel forgiveness, to see that human being, meant that I could be released from the anger, from all those things I mentioned, resent, that would make me a victim for life. And so that ended up being a really good choice.
Right. And
me.
You said that you wrote that escape was a seduction, one that I wouldn't give into. And why was that a choice that you made? How does someone balance between the peace or how did you balance between the peace that you knew that you needed and resisting the urge to escape?
Yeah, it's a temptation to escape. It's a temptation either to physically run away, and I had people suggest that to me. You'll read about one friend's father who phoned me up, because it's funny how people react. Like, some people want to give you advice, some people want to get away from you. And this one person, he said, it was 5 days after the crimes happened, and he was like, okay, so do you have your house on the market? I think you should move to Ottawa. I think you should do this. I think you should do this. And all the message was, get away from it, like as if I could run away from it. And I thought maybe that would work for some people, but I realized that it was not going to be, it wasn't going to be a reality. I had to work things out. I thought I still had a job, I owned a home, all kinds of things. But I also just knew if I make an attempt to just run away from this, then it will catch up with me. It will absolutely catch up with me in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And someday I'm going to have to face it all. I'm going to have to work through loss, betrayal, victimhood, all kinds of the sheer trauma of it all happening. And I just wanted to do that right away. And so it's funny, actually, when we were choosing a title for my book with the publisher, I wanted to have the word "through" in it, because, as I said, it's through a prison glass wall, but it's also, it tells you that it's a journey. And I really had to commit to going through everything, to going to some very, very dark and painful places, and somehow trusting that I would come out the other side. And that's where I wanted to be. I wanted to come out the other side and not, and be free, and be free from it, and not think that I'm going to be constantly triggered, not think every time when I eventually started dating, I wanted to be in a really healthy place and to, you know, have a future for myself. And if I didn't deal with it all, it would just keep coming up.
So how did you stay positive then? Or did you stay positive?
I did. I mean, I think I'm fundamentally a very positive person, and I love life, and that's a wonderful gift to have. But it was a very practical, diligent process every single day, making that choice. I remember saying to friends, like, every single day I'm going to wake up and get dressed and put on earrings. And if you see me not wearing earrings, that is going to be the day that you should know I need more help than I'm getting, because that's going to be my symbol. And I think because I was a counselor, I had some strategies for how to, you know, it was good to realize everything I'd been telling kids all these years about having a healthy life was true, because all of a sudden it all got put to the test. But it was unbelievably hard to initially demonstrate resilience, but then to actually live out that resilience every single day. And thankfully, I had my family. You'll get to know some of my family members who stuck by me. It was painful for everybody, you know, absolutely everybody. We lost all our privacy. We were just shattered. And for the friends, like my friend Rachel, who you mentioned, so I said some people walked away from me and other people came very close and said, we're going to walk with you on this. Nobody had a guidebook, nobody had a map, but some people were able just to walk with me on that journey, and that's what saw me through. So when I got very, very low, then I had people to kind of step in and boost me up again. But it was a scary time, because I didn't know when am I going to be better. You know, am I going to get better with enough time to become a mother? Am I going to get, like, how many years is this going to take to feel like a whole person again? There was total uncertainty and total freedom. I didn't have anybody to talk to who had been through something like this. I looked everywhere for help and couldn't find it. I looked for a book to read and ended up writing the book myself because I couldn't find it anywhere at all. So it was terrifying.
And didn't you have someone tell you that it would be 5 years? Or that you needed to give yourself 5 years?
I had someone give me the 5 days. So as I said, my friend's father gave me 5 days. And then someone I worked with actually it told me about some multiple trauma that had happened in her life. Different from mine, of course, but traumatic. And she said, you know, I think you should give yourself 5 years until you get to a point where not every decision you make is ruled by what happened. And that was actually very accurate. Very accurate in a progression, but to a point
it's not like suddenly 5 years and bam.
Yeah, great. Like, it was that day circle on the calendar. No, it's like a really long progression. But
wow. So you say that you asked a question in the book that I think you probably asked yourself often. You said, why choose further suffering when there's already more than enough pain to go around? And how did that idea help you over the next few years? I think you mentioned that fairly close to the beginning of the book, so 2005, the end of 2005, and then how did that help you to get through?
Yeah, that's actually comes from Buddhist spirituality, is that concept that pain is inevitable and suffering is optional. And it's something that meant a lot to me. I was raised a Catholic, and so we love suffering. The passion of Christ, like passionate suffering and all that. So, but I really like that kind of thing because it gives you some power back. You know, like we don't have a choice. We don't have a choice about what people do to us. We're not in control of anybody else at any point. But we do have a choice about how we're going to cope with something. And I remember the first time, I think, when I remembered that saying is when I was holding a little friend's baby. And I realized this little baby, I could look at this little baby. You know, I had a miscarriage as well on the day of these crimes. I could look at this baby and think every time, this is the baby that is not mine. This is my lost baby. And focus on that sadness or that loss. And I thought, how could I do that to this perfect little baby that I'm holding that is somebody else's pride and joy? And so that's what I realized is I could suffer more. I could choose to feel that sadness holding this baby, or I could choose to feel her amazing little life and trust that somehow that day would come for me, you know.
Great.
So it was something that was very helpful. You know, I kind of picked up a lot of, I was very hungry all the time for little things that would help me, whether it was a phrase or an image. I started doing a lot of artwork prescribed to me by my family doctor, thank goodness, because she was an absolute hero of mine. She had diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder about a month after these crimes, and much of the aftermath was still happening. And we talked about ways to recover, and she said, you know, I can give you a prescription for something that's going to suppress your emotions, or, you know, maybe help you get through day by day. And I didn't want to do that, at least for the time being. I didn't want to do that because I knew I had to get what was going on inside me out. I had to get it out, and if I didn't, what would happen the day I stopped taking the medication is that it would all be there. So I said, no, I want to do something that expresses it, and she suggested doing some art therapy. As I said, Jason was a fantastic artist. We had a room full of art supplies in our house, you know, projects stopped in time, and she sort of looked around and said, you should do something with this. And so I started doing some artwork and getting out some of my emotions. You can see those, a lot of those paintings on my website, and there's some in the book as well. And that was another strategy for dealing with the emotions. So I just, and in my artwork you'll see a lot of images, these things I would hold on to, like one of my favorites is a salmon swimming upstream like 1,000 kilometers for new life. And I would just see those images in nature and think, these miracles, I'm on the same journey. I have a long journey ahead of me for a new life. And if a little tiny salmon with a brain the size of my fingernail can do it, surely I'm going to make it too. And I just, you hold on to what you can in a crisis. So
it seems like part of what you were holding on to was being able to see Jason and work through it with him. Mm-hmm. And so that would be, what you were doing isn't technically considered restorative justice per se, but I guess then, well actually maybe first, can you tell us the difference between I don't know how to say this word, retributive justice
yeah.
Versus restorative justice?
Yeah, sure. And just to go back to sort of the point where I realized that jails were protecting all these people from facing up to what they did, and realizing also a lot of gaps in our whole system, like becoming a subject in a way of the justice system, also an observer on it, was pretty eye-opening. You know, it took a year for a Crown attorney to be signed. Here we had someone who'd turned himself over to police, given a full confession that exactly matched the victim's statements. And as you'll find out through the book, it took 2.5 years just for Jason to plead guilty. So there was a huge number of problems. And I knew a little bit about restorative justice from my work with youth as a guidance counselor. I like the sound of it, restorative justice. That sounds nice. You know, what is it? And I ended up studying a lot more and understanding what basically the system that we have now, retributive justice or conventional justice, sort of asks. First, it sees crime mainly as an assault on the state, and we see that referenced in court cases, trials. Jason was Regina versus Staples, the Queen of England versus Jason, and I was like, where are the people that have been harmed? You know, none of us were there, not the victims, not their families, not me, not my family, nobody. It was just the state versus so-and-so. So that's how retributive justice sees it, and then the questions that then get asked mainly are, what law was broken, who did it, and what punishment does that person deserve? And that's essentially how our system functions on those three questions. And they're important questions, but I think they're limited questions. So restorative justice actually, instead of seeing crime as an assault on the state, sees crime as an assault on relationships of trust. The fundamental thing that we have to function as a healthy society is trust. And so therefore it asks different questions. The three questions are, who's been harmed? And as soon as we ask who's been harmed, we are inviting people to participate. We're opening ourselves up to understanding the ripple effect of crime, which is a lot of what I write about. We are including the victims of offenses, we're including their family members, we're including the community. You know, the community of Peterborough was very much affected by this. The store owner where the crimes happened, our neighbors, everybody would ask me, it would ask my family, and it would ask Jason. It would include Jason. People harm themselves by committing crimes, and would also seek to understand what had brought him to that place of committing harm in the first place. So we ask who is harmed. Then once we know everyone who is harmed, then we can ask what do those people need, and ask those people directly, what do you need? What is it that you need? We can't undo what happened, but what would you need to actually bring your life to a place of peace, to fullness, to pursuing your dreams, to living fully, instead of, you've been victimized, you're ruined for life, and you should be satisfied by the sentencing of a person to prison or whatever it is. And then once we know what the needs are, then we ask, okay, so who can actually provide for those needs? Are there resource people in the community? What can the offender do? Actually, what can the offender do to make amends, to pay restitution, whether in kind or actually in money? And it's a much more collaborative process. Sometimes restorative justice comes to a place of a direct victim-offender dialogue through a long preparation process. I mean, one of the fundamental needs that victims often have or report having is having so many questions, just like I did. What happened? Why was it me? Was I targeted? Why did you do this? What were you thinking at the time? And how do I know this is never going to happen again? And so getting the answer to those kind of questions is often what will help move people forward in their lives. So the system that we have now, conventional justice, separates people, makes things very black and white. You're on this side or you're on this side. You're in jail, you're not in society, you are. But restorative justice actually can bring people together. So, and we even see this in cases of homicide, where surviving family members need to actually meet with the murderer to say, what happened? Why did you do it? So I didn't have a formal restorative justice process, but I had a victim-offender dialogue between Jason and I in the jail, when we would meet, and that's something that I, having support for that. Lucky for me, Jason would talk to me, because one of the strange things about jails is that the inmates have the power in terms of whether or not they will see their family members. I would watch people arrive at the jail. They might have driven from Thunder Bay, 20 hours away. They get to the jail, and the person that they've come to see refuses to see them. So they're left with nothing. And I think that we need a lot more support for people who are coming like that, who deserve to have the answers to their questions, who deserve to know what has happened, who deserve an apology if that's possible, a lot of things like that. So that's one of the things that I advocate for now. And also here in Toronto, I work as a restorative justice facilitator with young offenders who want the chance to meet with their victim and understand what they did and build empathy. And that's mainly what that does, as well as is build empathy.
Okay, so I'm going to ask 2 more questions and then we'll open it up to the floor. I have so many questions that I could ask you. Goodness. There seems to be quite a shift about the middle of the book, where it goes from discussing the actual events and how you learned about it and what happened, to really becoming proactive in terms of restorative justice and really going to talk to Jason and figuring things out. And could you tell us about this shift and when that happened, or maybe what shifted in your mindset, or maybe why you chose that in the book?
Sure. I think a lot of it is me personally trying to work through this and trying to understand what had happened, trying to make sense of what was so senseless. But then I was, at the same time, as I say, I was also becoming an observer on how some of our systems work. And my eyes were being forced open to the vulnerability of so many people going through the criminal justice system. And I couldn't turn that off. As I progress and as I start to do better, and I know that I am going to find a way out of this, I realized, I'm lucky. Jason eventually was declared a dangerous offender. It's the highest sentence we have in Canada. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. So even though I was facing the worst situation in terms of a sentence, I felt like a widow. I lost my husband. It was hard to grieve because not everybody wanted to give me the time to grieve that. I also realized that I was one of the lucky people to go through the justice system as a family member, because I have an education, I have a supportive family, I'm a middle-class person, I can advocate for myself, I'm not marginalized by not speaking the language or other things that are really difficult for people. And I would look around the prison visiting room and think, are any of these other people here who I could see, just visibly see, were struggling with single parenthood or all kinds of things, are they going to be able to advocate for themselves? And what are they going through? And sometimes I heard their stories. They'd lost their jobs too. They had to move. You know, there's no such thing as an inmate being able to pay child support on $6 a day. That's not happening. So I thought, I don't want my experience and what I learned to be just for me, or really for nothing. I couldn't really bear that idea, and so I started to think, is there a broader way that I can reach out, and how does this affect other Canadians? And I learned that there are about 12,000 people federally incarcerated, many thousands more provincially incarcerated. Where are their family members? If everybody had 10 family and friends at the time of their arrest, which most people do, then we're talking like, over 150,000 people who are affected by the crimes of a loved one or a friend or co-worker, but we never hear their stories, and we're not helping them. So that's when I sort of thought I could try to reach out and be that voice for other people. And that was also been a very healing thing. Since the book has come out, it's been out for 6 weeks, I've heard from hundreds of people across the country who write me to say, my son is in prison. Your story is my story. I hear from victims who felt really unsatisfied by their process, who know they're not going to be healed by retribution. And that's been really, really gratifying. And I've gotten to travel across the country as well and meet directly with people in the justice system, judges, lawyers, social workers, all kinds of people. And I've also been speaking to prison inmates as well. So just sometimes my favorite group of people to sit in a room and talk with, people who've harmed others very badly, and usually who've in some way been harmed themselves. So that's really meaningful. It makes me know that what I went through wasn't for nothing,
Wow. Bringing it to, I guess, right now, you said the book just came out 6 weeks ago. You're married now.
Yeah.
Mike's here.
Yeah.
And
spoiler alert.
Yeah, sorry.
There he is.
Sorry.
Well, just teasing you. Most people know anyway. Yeah.
And you're pregnant.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
We're expecting twins in May, so it's good. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's amazing. It's just amazing. I remember, as I said, I'm a very practical thinker. A lot of the time when we're talking about what saw me through in this diligence, I used to look for symbols or clues, and I actually looked at one point to physics, the law, I think it's physics anyway, I'm not really scientific, but the law of like, for every action there's an equal and opposing reaction, and I would think, okay, logically, the most unimaginable, awful, beyond my worst nightmare situations happened, and so therefore it's not only likely, but it is true, it's more than probable that I will come to a time that is so much more beautiful and unimaginably joyful than ever, and I just have to get myself from here to there, and I did.
So how does Mike handle you talking about Jason all the time and what you went through? Like how?
Yeah, Mike is. I'll answer for you, and then you can object. Is that good? That's what we talked about doing. Yeah. You can ask him yourself and see if he gives the same answer. But for one thing, I don't talk about Jason very often in our home life. Our home life is kind of a sanctuary from all of this. But Mike is just loving, accepting, respectful, confident person who sees me as part of me as this experience, and part of me as everything I was before and after. And is just very, very proud, supportive, comes to all my events whenever he came on my book tour with me, and that's the kind of partner everybody should get to have.
Right.
So, yeah, and very understanding, very just a very non-judgmental person.
And he doesn't want to be in the limelight.
Doesn't want to be in the limelight.
At the back, not answering questions.
Yeah, but that's good. It's good to have somebody that is just there to support you.
Absolutely.
For sure, yeah.
So let's open it up to the floor. Does anyone have questions? Yeah.
Yeah.
How were you able to gain trust back in people?
Yeah, again, I think trust, it's a choice. It's a choice. And I realized it'd be very easy for me to never trust anybody again. And actually that might be expected. I don't think anyone would judge me if I never trusted again. But I had to be practical and look at my life. What would a life look like where you didn't trust anybody? It'd be a really empty life. And so part of it is just a practical decision. I'm not going to let Jason, one person's betrayal, ruin the future for me. And trust is still, I don't get to be protected because, one really bad thing happens, so it's not going to happen again. I mean, someone else could betray my trust. Anyone can do that. We can all have the power to do that to each other. And so we take chances, That's probably as simple as it is. It was hard. It's hard to trust, for sure. And I kind of took some baby steps as I started out, dating again, or it was very hard for me to trust an employer again after how I was treated by my employer. Really, really hard, actually. Really hard to eventually go back into a school, start my career all over again. And actually with my former employer, I tried to do a formal restorative justice process with my principal, and they refused it. And so I never got the things I got from Jason, apology, accountability, remorse, I never had from the people who wrongly accused me, who took away the life that I had. I didn't never get it. And so it's in some ways it's hard, I wouldn't really value it, but it's been a different kind of challenge to just move forward and give other people the chance to be part of my life and give myself a chance to be part of their lives.
Yeah.
How did it take you before you stopped second guessing yourself in every new relationship, friendship, any new people who came into your life, before you started second guessing your own judgment?
Well, I didn't second guess my own judgment because I didn't make any mistakes. I really look at it. It was Jason's betrayal. In fact, I knew more about Jason than most people know about someone they're going to get married to. Usually, don't get to ask professionals for their opinion, not to make light of it, but I really was very. I think I was really did what I needed to do to try to understand, and the message was so clear. Like, everyone trusted Jason. Nobody knew this would happen. The only person who knew anything was wrong was Jason. And so I never put myself through the agony of thinking, why I misjudged him. There was no way to tell. There was no way to ever tell anything was going wrong. I never heard Jason swear. He didn't get angry. We had a wonderful life. He didn't give me any clues. He didn't give me the chance to help him or to stop this. And so there's nothing to blame myself for. Certainly, of course, I did go through a time where I had, you check everything. I would go through my house and look, were there clues that I'd missed? Had I missed anything? And there was absolutely nothing. What is harder to deal with, I don't second guess myself, is other people second guessing me and putting that judgment on me. She should have known. She was naive. Why did she ever marry a murderer? And those are all the questions I've had to face in the press, even now. And no one, it's interesting, but no one ever asks those questions of the National Parole Board, of Corrections Canada, all these professionals, mostly men, who were the people who actually knew Jason much longer than me and have the full support. Last year when the Colonel Russell Williams trial happened, it was agonizing for me because I watched his wife go through what I did. These endless questions of her, like, how could she not have known? What's wrong with her? And it was just so wrong to do that, because I knew when someone has a severe psychiatric disorder, which is absolutely what happened here to Jason, to Colonel Russell Williams, it's not making light of ever what they did, but obviously these are people very, very sick. Then to blame someone who's been victimized by their actions or is just the wrong way to go. And I think it's easy to blame a woman because we attach those kind of things to women, like naivety, being blinded by love, those kind of things. But I don't see the same blame going toward men. Not that it should. It needs to go toward the person who committed the harm and understanding them. So it's harder when people put that on me. But I don't feel it myself. Yeah.
Bobby.
I find your story very inspiring, and in particular, your ability to even talk about Jason in such a not super positive life, but without any kind of remorse or any kind of bad. Not talking bad about him. You seem to be talking very positive. So that blows my mind because that would make it better. My question though is like, I'd love your thoughts on hope. And you believe that all people can eventually redeem themselves?
Sorry, the last part was that
all people can eventually redeem themselves.
I don't know about all people. I hope so. You know, Jason used to say to me once in a while, he'd say, "Do you think I'm alive for a reason?" And because on the night of these crimes, you know, at one point it could have easily been a double homicide. He started to formulate a suicide plan, which was intercepted, and so at the end of that night, instead of 3 lives that could have been lost, 3 lives were saved. And so he would say this to me, and I would have to think, of course, must be some reason why you weren't able to take your life that night. There must be some purpose in you being here on the planet, but it's not going to be given to you. You know, you're going to have to work for it and find it. And then finding it in a prison is, I don't even like to think about it. So it's hard to think about, you know, where he is or people that are there suffering. I guess when it comes to hope, I mean, we have to have it. You know, we just have to have it. I think that's all there is to it. You know, I don't believe that everything happens for a reason. Nothing that happened, none of the violence was necessary. It didn't have to happen. There's no reason for it. It's senseless. But, you know, is there life beyond that violence? You know, there has to be. And so I think it's a choice, but it's a choice to commit to. And that's a lot of things I realized, like my choice to forgive, my choice to find hope, were not things I did once. They were everyday processes, you know. But yeah, I think I do believe that.
What I love is that you took responsibility for your own choices. You know, you've talked about I chose, and what strong words those are. Power of us not only to forgive, but to choose how we're feeling and what we make of it. You know, my question to you would be, and I kind of tweeted this one out, how do you know if you really know something?
Well, I don't know that we ever do. Sometimes, you know, you'll meet a lot of people in my book, lots of friends, lots of people I thought were really good friends, I thought were a certain way and they weren't really. And it's very true that, you know, in a crisis you really find out who your friend, I think it's not, you don't find out who your friends are, you find out who people are in a crisis. And something like this, like crime and violence are, you know, they hit at some of the most fundamental cores of who we are as human beings. All those big questions, love, trust, do we know each other, all those things. And this hit so hard, so many people, that when I work with teenagers and I talk about this, I say it's like, you know, everyone has a hand of cards that is their character or who they really, really are on the inside. And some people walk around with their cards showing. So in a crisis, they don't really change. Like my friend Rachel, this is what you see is what you get. That's who she is. Some people are, you know, like this. Some of them are showing, some of them are not. Some of them show cards, but they're not really the same. What they show is not really who they are. And so it was painful to find out, you know, my one friend who was always going to compassion retreats and, you know, sort of always preaching this stuff. When push came to shove, he was one of the most judgmental people in my life. And other people that maybe I wouldn't have expected to be so open-minded or so understanding they were right there for me, like my neighbors who had every right to feel scared, so scared they would never come out of their homes, were the people who came out of their homes and came across the street and brought lasagna and said, we're here for you. You know, we are devastated by this, but we're here for you. So, you know, I don't know that we ever know. I don't even know if we know who ourselves are. I think that's the best place to start, though, is know who you are, and then, you know, you'll generally attract people also, I think, who know who they are, or I don't know. But it's like trust. Like you know, we don't have control over other people, what they show us, when they show us. But it doesn't mean you can't try to be discerning or get to know people, you know.
Yeah.
So creating the future that you're now living into, everything that you're up to, and what you had happen, what would you love to achieve, you know, toward that last lap of your life? What do you want to have seen happen as a result that you have to share with people because of this?
Well, in the next, I don't know, 10 days, I'd like to see this omnibus bill not get passed. That's a very immediate concern. I would like to become more involved in getting my story out to people who have a lot of power in this country, to make laws, to plan our budgets, to spend our millions of dollars for us. Personally, you know, as someone who's still working to recover my losses as a victim, I'm not interested in spending my taxpayer dollars to build more prisons when I know what is not happening in the prisons. You know, where Jason is, there's 600 men, it's the biggest men's institution in Canada. There's one part-time psychologist. But yet, you know, as like an average citizen, you know, we hear correctional services and we think that that's what's happening, as people are being corrected in a way, and it's just simply not happening. I think, so that's somewhere that I would really like for this message to get, and I'm working hard at trying to get it to into the hands of those people who make those decisions. So I think taking on a leadership role in that, and really speaking to our leaders about what it is that we want as citizens. You know, I think fundamentally we all want to live in a safer, more peaceful society. I don't think we're going to get there by looking at punishment as the only, you know, or the idea that prison is a deterrent, when we don't look at the root causes of crime, poverty, mental illness, you know, inequality, a lack of education, all those things that we know put people in prison in the first place. So that's a big goal of mine as well. Yeah, and then I think just, you know, to continue my work with youth around crime prevention. I work with an organization called Love, Leave Out Violence, and we go to Love Camp every summer. It always sounds so racy. It's like, I love telling people I'm going to Love Camp next week, and they're like, really? Like, yeah, Leave Out Violence Camp. But there, it's a fantastic youth organization working with young people affected by violence. Either they've perpetrated violence, they've been victims of violence, they've witnessed violence, and they all want to transform their stories into peacemaking work through the arts, spoken word, rap, visual art, that kind of thing. So by dedicating my work to that, I think is, and always with, you know, young people. Old people make great change too. My mom is a hero. She, you'll also get to know her as well. And she's taken her experience through this and felt a real draw to work in the jails as well. So she also volunteers with victim services, but she visits inmates at the Hamilton Detention Center. And she also runs a card making program for women inmates. My mom's a retired kindergarten teacher. So she says the same thing. It's the same thing that you needed in kindergarten that maybe you never got. Was the, you're doing well. What a great idea. I like the way you did that. You're worth it. You have worth. You know, that's the work that she's trying to do as a retired person. And actually, most of the programs, there are amazing things happening in some of our prisons, and they're mostly being done by volunteers. That's how our system is working. So, yeah, but I have lots of goals.
In the white? Yeah.
Do you see Jason as a victim at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Jason was very badly abused as a child, sexually abused, physically abused, neglected, was in foster care for a period of time. Basically, you know, anything that we can think of, how could you make a perfect little baby into someone who could grow up to do this? That is at least part of what happened to him. It's not ever an excuse. But I need to understand who the whole person is. He is also the victim of violence inside prison. You know, it's something I never thought about too, is once people get to prison, then there are a lot more victims that happen there. There's massive sexual assault, physical assault. I mean, all kinds of, it's a violent place to be. So yeah, I definitely see Jason as someone who's been victimized as well. One of the phrases that we often use in restorative justice is hurt people hurt people. That is what happens, you know, and we don't ever need to, we're never condoning what someone does when we seek to understand where it came from. So yeah. I also think, just one more comment on that, I think, you know, as I said, Jason is someone who suffers from some kind of horrific mental illness. And we incarcerate and try to punish the mental illness out of an awful lot of people. And it's suffering, you know, to have sexual sadism, to have dissociated identity, or whatever it is Jason has that after a 6-week assessment was called a personality disorder, not otherwise specified. And on that diagnosis, that was enough to incarcerate him for the rest of his life. I see some gaps there too. I'd like to see a lot more research and funding going into understanding sexual deviance and disorder. You know, we hate it as a society, and we should, but if we're going to eliminate it, then we need to accept that it is a type of mental illness, and we need to put the same kind of backing into it that we've put in advancing us so far in understanding and treating and humanizing other mental disorders. You know, Mike and I live just down the street from what used to be 999 Queen Asylum. I was now an amazing center for research, CAMH. But you know, women there not so long ago, 50 years ago, were locked up with postpartum depression. And we've come a very long way in understanding and helping people who suffer from illnesses live safely in the community, or even live safely in a, you know, if Jason has to live in, what am I saying, like locked away, then in a controlled environment where he can't hurt anybody, couldn't it be somewhere where there's some kind of healing or some kind of something good going on? I mean, all that's happening in the prison is people are serving time. That's it. Like in a very robotic way, they're just serving time. And most of them are not like Jason. Most of them are going to get out. Almost all are going to get out. There's very few dangerous offenders or people who are never going to be released. And I just think we have to be very practical about who they're going to be when they get released, setting them up for success. Because not only might they deserve it, we deserve it. We deserve for people to come back and live safely and contribute and keep our children safe. Absolutely.
Marianne.
You mentioned earlier that you kind of, you know, you recognized your positionality in being educated and a counselor, middle class, so to speak, and that a great deal of crime and difficulty also happens to the marginalized people in society, and people who can't understand it the way you did, who can't counsel themselves. I guess my question is, how would you suggest that we find ways to reach out to them? I mean, the correctional facility focuses so much on the offender and not on the family, like you said. And these marginalized families, single mothers, people who are in really dire, difficult situations, someone who can't just find another job after they're kicked out of their last job. How do we reach out to them?
Great question. You made a lot of really important points. I think, you know, when I go back to the political piece, if apparently we have billions of dollars to spend from our taxpayers' money over the next 5 years on building these bigger prisons, incarcerating more people for longer, why do we not reallocate some of those resources into victim support, into restitution, into all kinds of outreach at all various points along the way? That's just something that absolutely has to happen. It also has to happen in policy development. So one of the pieces that I've been working on when I go to speak in communities or with Victim Services Agency is expanding the definition of victim so that it's not limited to if you had an offense committed against you. So that's like the criminal justice viewpoint, what law was broken, but we want to look at who has been harmed and how do we stop that ripple effect from just going out and out. And have seen some success in that already in some of the communities up in Northern Ontario where I have been. They've officially changed their victim services mandate so that they are automatically providing immediate outreach to the family of the accused person. At the same time as they're reaching out to help the victims of offenses. So I think that has to happen, and that goes right along with training and understanding and the sharing of stories so that people can understand that ripple effect. You know, I encountered people at victim services who just simply said to me, "You don't belong here. You know, you need to give other people time. You need to go home. Don't you understand how serious this was?" They didn't understand what my experience was. So that's something I think that also has to change, and that's another reason why I certainly wanted to share my story so that people can just have a better understanding. And then it can also happen on the individual level in our own communities. I look at the people who did reach out to me who said, it's safe for you to be here, we're going to help you through this. In many ways, like the crime is kind of like a death in the family, the same way that some people know what to do when there's a death or a tragedy, and some people don't know very well what to do. But the same kind of just acting with compassion, bringing over food, lending, what you need, that very basic principle of what community is something that we can all somehow play a part in.
Yes, well, okay, we'll do these last two questions and then we're good. So go ahead.
I have two questions. The first one is, how did you feel when you found out the verdict that Jason's convicted? What were the emotions that you went through? Knowing that he wasn't convicted?
Yeah. It wasn't a surprise by the time we finally got to the day of sentencing. Jason had actually made a decision not to contest the dangerous offender designation, and that had actually never happened before in Canada. That someone didn't go through a whole separate trial just for a dangerous offender designation. Jason felt that it was his only way of really truly showing his remorse and responsibility to the court was by accepting this highest sentence, not putting the victims through 1 or 2, 3 more years of trial. And he wanted to do that long before my family and I were able to let him do that, because we felt like he was just throwing away the key on himself. Because we wanted to see him get some treatment. We didn't want him to be released. Nobody wants him to be released if he's dangerous, least of all Jason. He's the first person to say, like, I don't want to hurt anybody again. I don't think he understands why he did what he did. I've heard him say to me, I don't hate women. Like, why would I do this? And we hope that he can get the answers for that. And that can still happen, hopefully it could ever happen while he's incarcerated. So it wasn't so much getting the verdict, although certainly a dangerous offender, like I've described, is like a terminal illness in reverse. I knew on this day that these happened that I had been widowed by these crimes. And I was never going to have the life that I'd had. I was never going to have Jason back. And then the legal process was like going backwards and trying to figure out where did this come from, what's going to happen. And it was very final to sort of actually hear that and watch him be carted away to jail forever. More the feeling that I was left with at the end of this day of sentencing, where I gave a victim impact statement, my mom gave one, the victims gave their statements, Jason gave a statement. There was this unbelievable amount of pain and loss that was described. And all that happened at the end of this day, at the end of 2.5 years of a trial, is that one person was sent to prison for the rest of his life and everyone else was sent home. And that feeling I had was of what a waste. And what did we all go through this for? And I just couldn't live with that. That was almost, there were so many worse moments. That was a worse moment, was that, what was this for? And what's everyone supposed to do now? We're just on our own. Thanks for giving your statement. Not even thanks. Exhibit 13B is your statement. And now you're on your own. And so that was my feeling. That's what led to doing this work that I do now, speaking and writing about it, is because I couldn't live with it. That everything that we all went through was for nothing. So that's what happened.
My second question is, did you find it difficult to separate your personal journey from the journey of the other victims you saw?
Yeah. You know, these women that this happened to one was 26 years old and one was 46 years old. We all lived in the same community. Much later on I found out we lived quite close to each other. They could have been my friends, they could have been my sister. And I felt absolute agony to be so separated from them in the criminal justice process. Essentially, from the very first moment that this happened, you know, as I had these questions about, Jason, who are you? What happened? Where are you? Was also, where are these women? What are they going through? You know, what happened to them is my own worst nightmare as a woman. I couldn't believe this had happened to them at the hands of my husband. When I found out that they'd been in my home, I felt so helpless. Like, just, I remember wishing that if anything of mine could have comforted them, like my crafts, or like these, you know, just being just overcome with this helplessness. That was horrific. And then wanting to help them just as a regular person, not as the wife of the offender, but just as a woman, wanting to help them and not being allowed, being told by the Crown, by the victim services people, you're on this side. I didn't know their identities. I knew their names. They were on search warrants in my home, but I had no idea who they were. It drove me to a place of almost paranoia where I couldn't go out of my house because I didn't know, am I going to see them? You know, one of them had a stepson who was one of my students at school, but the school would never tell me who it was. So every time I saw one of the 1,000 kids at school, I would fear, is that him? It was terrible. It was terrible. And so I just felt so separated. And you'll read a scene in the book. Maybe I'll read it to you. It's really short. It's where I actually meet one of the victims, and it's on that last day of sentencing that I just described to you. So it's a short scene, but so I had never spoken to them in 2.5 years. I never one I had spoken to earlier because we met in court finally, but other than that, I was completely separated and had no way of communicating with them or helping them. Although lots of people demanded that I would, you know, like, why don't you help the victims? I was like, well, I can't because nobody will tell me who they are. So anyway. So we're in court on the last day, and I was reading my statement, my victim impact statement. About 2/3 of the way through my statement, the judge interrupted me and announced we would be taking a recess. Had I said something wrong? Why was I being cut off? The Crown Attorney ushered me off the stand back through the wooden gate toward the gallery. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the second victim, the younger victim, stand and push her way through the row where she sat with her family, out to the aisle, and then rush toward me. I felt a flash of tear until I saw her tears. I felt a flash of fear until I saw her tears and a look of deep concern in her eyes. There was no trace of anger or animosity. Reaching me, she opened her arms, and I stepped into an embrace that was one of the most meaningful of my life. We held each other for a moment there in the middle of the courtroom. Then we let our arms drop so we could step back and look one another in the eye, still grasping each other at the elbows, and we both began talking at once. She said, "It makes me so angry to hear how you've been treated. I want you to know I've never thought you were responsible for any of this." I could barely hold back my tears. I looked at this woman. This could have been sister or friend. I thought about her every day for 2.5 years. I told her so, asking how she was and if there was anything I could do. "I want you to know that I don't hate Jason," she said firmly. And with the truth of my whole heart, I responded, "It's okay with me if you do. You can hate him." And that's the only time I ever met her. As I say, it was very, very healing. It just sort of proved to me that what heals is reconnection, not banishment to one side or the other. So it was hard to write my story, not knowing them and not. essentially having permission of that, but I just decided, to tell the minimum amount of what happened to them in order to be able to tell my story, and just write with reverence to what happened to them. There are so many, many stories that come out of a situation like this. Mine is just one of the many people affected by the crimes on that day.
This book will make you cry a lot.
I keep getting emails from people that are like, I stayed up all night reading your book. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but thank you. It's like I'm always saying, thank you so much, but I'm really sorry. But I do appreciate the time that people spend with me, walking on this journey and reading on your own time. Appreciate it.
And there's one more question.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, you kind of come with like a political agenda. You've spoken about it. Are you going to write another book?
Oh, write another book? I hope not. Oh my gosh.
Or take that agenda up?
Yeah, for sure. Not. I don't think in the form of a book. It's hard to say. I mean, I'm just coming out of writing, so there's a lot of recovery just from the 3-year process of writing this book. But I do write articles. Actually, I left a number of I was asked to contribute to this year's National Restorative Justice Week kit, so I wrote an article for that. I'm certainly writing to my MPs, the Justice Minister, the Prime Minister, who else? The Justice Critic, all those sorts of people to try to get that voice across. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. So would you write too? That would be good. Yeah, and that's a big piece of it too. It's just engaging other people. I mean, we have to do something for whatever it is that we believe in, And I spent a lot of time living in South America, where we always criticize these corrupt South American governments and these unstable societies. But really, what I saw living in South America was the most active, engaged citizenship of anybody. People don't like what's going on. Where I lived in Ecuador, they throw out the president. Like there was about 5 presidents in the time that I lived in the country in a year and a half, and not that we want to live that kind of instability, but it's that activism of, we're not going to stand for this. We're not going to do that. And I think some of my inspiration for political engagement comes from that example. So, but it's not easy. I haven't been very successful even in getting through to people I thought would respond. So I just keep pushing at it and take it to the streets. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah. There's a good, if you're interested, I know there's quite a big petition going on right now about the omnibus bill through smartjustice.ca is one place that you can access some letters if you want to send your own, or you just want to know more information. Certainly by seeing your own MP is good, whatever your views are, and they might not be the same as mine, but certainly whatever they are, I encourage you to get involved.
So just to finish up then, since this is the Leaders Lounge, would you consider yourself a leader? And if yes, then to where would you lead people if you could?
Oh my. Well, I believe in leadership by example. That's the number one thing I know about working with young people. That's our example for our kids that we're expecting, is how can we model what it is that we want to have in our society. So in that way, I hope so. I'm certainly far from perfection. Absolutely, but yeah, I hope that I can stand as a leader for what is possible. Just the healing process that has taken place, I think, is something that everyone deserves, and showing that can be that you don't have to be damaged for life if something terrible has happened to you, whatever it is. A bad divorce, not that there's a good divorce, but a bad divorce, whatever way your parents raised you that was unkind, or people who take these roles in our life, we don't have to be victim to that. So if people want to see me as a leader in healing, then that's fine by me. So yeah.
Great. So just before we thank Shannon, please feel free to stay and network. Hang out with people. There are, there are home-baked goods by yours truly and by Marie. So mad props to Marie for helping us out with that. Also, on the wall here, everyone wrote down something that was unique or awesome about themselves. So if you find something that you think is really fantastic, like my dad looks like Hagrid, you can be like, yo, whose dad looks like Hagrid? Let's talk about that. I think that's awesome. It's Justin, by the way. He's our tech guy. He's around here somewhere. You already know that, so find someone new. But that's a great way to kind of break down barriers in terms of networking. And also on the water bottles, there are conversation starters.